Hello, and thank you for coming to this critical incident debrief. My name is Lieutenant Hodges, and I will be the facilitator for this debrief. My role will be to examine the incident and spark a conversation among the parties here in an effort to identify what went well and what can be done better in the future. This is not a critical incident stress debrief. However, if you need those resources, we have some CISM representatives here for you. There are representatives present from each agency that responded to the shooting. We also have members of Communications Division. This is going to be a discussion to identify what happened, what we did as a response, why we did what we did, and what can we do in the future to improve. One thing to remember is that there's no rank in this room. This is a debrief that's meant to be productive so that we can learn what went well and what did not go so well. We're also going to determine what additional training is needed so any challenges that arose will not be a factor in the future. We're going to determine if policy or practices were deviated from. We're going to take certain circumstances that were outside the norm and learn from those. And we should ask ourselves if we had enough resources and if those resources were deployed as they should have been. Were there any other resources that we could have used to prevent some of these challenges from occurring? So what happened? On May 24th, 2022, a gunman entered the Robb Elementary School through an open door, armed with guns and a lot of ammunition. The gunman entered the classroom and began to shoot students and faculty. Law enforcement was called and responded quickly to the scene. The officers who arrived quickly narrowed down the location of the gunman and started advancing to that classroom. Gunshots were heard, and the officers started taking fire, some of them hit with shrapnel. The responding officers backed away and decided to treat the incident as a barricaded person instead of an active shooter. Eventually, additional resources did arrive on the scene, and those additional resources advanced onto the classroom and eliminated the threat. The chief of the Uvalde Independent School District was on the scene, and while those officers held back, he tried to negotiate with the barricaded person. The chief ordered the rest of the school to be evacuated. They started looking for keys to try to get into the classroom instead of just breaking in or using some other sort of pry tool. A lot of time went by. Students and faculty were in the room alone with the gunman, injured and dying. What was the standard procedure in incidents like this? Well, in an active shooter, the standard procedure is to immediately locate and eliminate the threat. A gunman was inside the classroom, filled with kids and teachers, while officers were on the scene, hearing shots being fired. But instead of treating this as an active shooter, officers backed away, treating it as a barricaded person. The theory was that the gunman kept to one area of the building and was refusing to come out. What makes this different? Well, there were shots being fired while the gunman was alone in a room with students and faculty. Did this deviate from standard practice? Absolutely. Standard practice is to treat this as an active shooter, not a barricaded person, so shots were actively being fired in a classroom where others were present. Perhaps the policy should more clearly delineate what makes an active shooter as opposed to a barricaded person. Was there anything out of the ordinary during this incident that presented itself? Initially, officers did not have the appropriate gear, which is why they retreated when they were fired upon. Each officer being issued proper gear, like ballistic shields, could have aided in the ability to advance to the classroom. Then parents started to show up at the school before a reunification site had been established. A chief or some other person of rank should have immediately set up a command post to establish clear guidance for those inside the school and those outside the school, such as establishing a reunification site for upset parents to report. Then you had inaccurate and incorrect information being released by multiple sources. There should be one PIO established to handle all media inquiries and speak with those concerned parties. Were the resources plentiful, or were there perhaps too many? Initially, the personnel who arrived on the scene were enough to enter the school, locate the shooter, and eliminate the threat. The resources, however, were lacking, as those responding officers did not have the proper equipment when they began to take on fire and were struck by shrapnel. There's no clear command post, which caused officers from numerous jurisdictions to self-deploy and even go rogue to some extent. Officers had no guidance, and those officers who self-deployed did not have any direction. Without knowing who was there or what their capabilities were, we were unable to effectively work toward and support the mission. In the future, a command post should be established early on to direct responding personnel and resources. Police vehicles were parked all over the streets, blocking the roadway, effectively preventing emergency personnel from accessing needed areas. Direction from the beginning could potentially have prevented this. People were everywhere. We had no idea who was on the scene, from the school to the officers, other emergency personnel. Those from the school left the scene without being noted and checked. So we had no idea what was going on. Did we have what we needed to do what we needed to do? No. Initially, the responding officers arrived on the scene with little to no gear to address this threat. This is why the officers retreated to a place of cover when they were fired upon. Other agencies, including DPS, arrived on scene, but it was not until a substantial time later officers arrived with the proper gear to advance to the classroom. In the future, we need to have gear issued to our officers, including ballistic shields. We need to train collectively with all the agencies surrounding Uvalde, including DPS, so that we can build relationships with those agencies. Does anybody else have anything they would like to contribute to the group? Okay, thank you for coming to this critical incident debrief.